Hare Om Namaha. A rose by any other name still smells as sweet. There are different kinds of roses. There's the red rose, the yellow rose, the blue rose, and the purple rose. Quite a bouquet of roses. And they are all roses. Then there are plastic roses. They may be colorful, but they are not roses. When using the term rose, it's only valid if we refer to an actual rose. The process of Krishna consciousness is known by many terms, each of which signals the particular emphasis of a prominent trait in it. For example, you have all read and heard that Krishna consciousness is called Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti technically refers to an extremely advanced state called Bhava, that stage of advanced Krishna consciousness. Yet every devotee who applies himself or herself to the process experiences fleeting moments of bhava, or ecstasy, within, often even at the beginning of the neophyte stage. It is thus not a misnomer to call the overall process by the term Bhakti Yoga, and Prabhupada advertised it as such. It is sometimes called sadhana bhakti. It is sometimes called vidhi sadhana bhakti. It is sometimes called raganuga sadhana bhakti. It is sometimes called sadhya bhakti, and that is at bhava. Siddhanta Sarasvati, Prabhupada's spiritual master, in a purport to his commentary on Brahma Samhita, has also called it Jnana Bhakti Yoga as per that preliminary stage. Krishna consciousness is also sometimes called mantra yoga, and this is because, especially in Prabhupada's branch of the Chaitanya Sampradaya, the Hare Krishna mantra is emphasized, and indeed it's integral to an obligatory ritual for all disciples under his direction and guidance, whether Diksha or Shiksha. Chanting 16 rounds daily, every day of every week of every month of every year is no mean feat. As such, the yoga can appropriately be called mantra yoga. Krishna consciousness is also sometimes called seva yoga. Seva is the Sanskrit which means service. And you can even see the English word service is a derivative of seva through Latin. No devotee in the branch of the line that Prabhupada established was ever at any time unaware of his stress upon, and indeed demand for, each of his disciples to serve him and his institution while it was bona fide. There was a chain of command in Prabhupada's Krishna consciousness movement, and nobody could ignore it. You received your marching orders to serve each day from that chain of command. It was as if being in military discipline, and you tried with due diligence to be successful in the service deputed to you. Now and then, sometimes it was rare, you were given some opportunity to serve Prabhupada directly. However, for most of the rank and file, for most of the real workers, you received your deputed service from the temple president or the collection commander or your sannyasi, and you carried it out. Krishna consciousness is also sometimes called buddhi yoga. This has been a bit misunderstood over the years, so I shall not delve heavily into that misunderstanding, although I have touched upon it in the past. An ultra-elevated status of Buddha Yoga, and this status is particularly mentioned in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. That's not what I'm describing here and what is being referred to here. Instead, what is being referred to is the working principles of Buddha Yoga. In this system, you fully apply your intelligence to your service, to the Guru, and the prosecution of your sadhana. This generally leads to success in your objectives, not always, but generally. All of which, those services, are dovetailed to the orders of the spiritual master as given and carried out by disciples in his hierarchical chain. And so pardon me for this somewhat lengthy prologue, which serves not only as knowledge, but also, you could say, mostly as an example. It is an example that the name or label does not matter, at least not very much, as long as the genuine process and system of the topmost yoga given to us is bona fide. You can refer to it by any of these terms. This system, by the way, only works when that hierarchy is giving the orders in the right way and is not deviated. And we shall certainly more than merely touch upon this fact and truth, as we always do as our presentations proceed. When action, via the working principles of Buddha Yoga, is prosecuted in the right way, your intelligence, the word Buddhi means intelligence, will become more powerful, more determined, more purified, and sharper. When a hierarchy in so-called Krishna consciousness is deviated, which they always are, utilizing any of these above-mentioned terms to refer to it is not describing what it purports to describe. Determination of the intelligence is integral to its prosecution, and it's particularly applicable to the transcendental system. In due course, Buddhi becomes so purified that it transmutes itself into pragya. But understanding this tattva requires a long explanation. That would be diversionary at this point, and it will not be undertaken. In the line of disciplic succession brought to us by Prabhupada, in whichever name you wish to label that spiritual process, you are emphasizing, as stated previously, a prominent trait of the process. There's nothing wrong with that. However, integral to whichever label you choose, the process you are referring to must be completely bona fide at any of its stages. If it is so, then it's linked to the disciplic succession through the most recent Acharya, capital A, by the way, the great man who delivered the devotional process to the Western world, the founder Acharya. Initiation into the line of disciplic succession provides a link for the prosecution of the yoga given to the disciple via his or her Diksha Guru. Initiation is integral to any yoga system, and it was also integral to Prabhupada's movement. Everything previous to genuine initiation has less value when compared to when genuine initiation is empowering an individual devotee, one who follows, that is, empowering him further. The initiated devotee is empowered to prosecute yoga during his or her probationary period within the transcendental system. Bhakti yoga equals mantra yoga equals seva yoga equals Buddha yoga, as long as they all are actually yoga. The name utilized to describe the yoga emphasizes what is only a secondary consideration, if even that. In terms of the initiation process, Prabhupada introduced something new in the early 70s, and that's why we're talking all about this in the prologue. The new element that Prabhupada brought to the process that was not there in the beginning in the 60s. His movement was growing fast. The number of his temples and centers was expanding rapidly, especially in the United States, where he first established his movement. He could not at all easily continue to personally perform the rituals of initiation ceremonies, and thus he introduced Ritvik initiations. In these new ceremonial processes, he no longer performed the initiation rituals. Instead, he had one of his elder disciples perform it on his behalf. In some cases, the minority report, he was personally present on the Vyasa-san to witness the initiation. When this was the case, he gave the beads to his new disciple and informed his new disciple of his new spiritual name that the devotee would now be known by throughout the movement. In most cases, once this Ritvik system of initiation was introduced, the temple president would receive a package containing a letter from Prabhupada wherein the Western names were juxtaposed to the spiritual name. The japa mala beads, often chanted on by Prabhupada in advance, would be included in the package. The devotee assigned to be a Ritvik and conduct the initiation ceremony, often the temple president, would then make all of the arrangements. He would determine the date of the ceremony, which would be held in his temple, obviously, and everything would be carried out in this way, which was fully authorized. It was fully authorized because the founder Acharya created and thus authorized it. In due course of time, this became known as Ritvik initiation. However, in the early to mid-70s, every devotee receiving initiation in this way knew perfectly well that Prabhupada was his Diksha Guru. No one considered Ritvik initiation to connote anything else. The devotees receiving initiation were 100% fixated upon Prabhupada as their initiating spiritual master, although he was not physically present at the ceremony. When asked, a devotee may say that he received a Ritvik initiation, but everybody in the movement knew exactly what that meant. As just alluded to, you could say that there was a kind of in-between initiation for those who received the Harinam or even the Brahman initiation. I have personal experience of this. In my Harinama initiation, wherein I received my spiritual name and my beads, Prabhupada was on his Vyasa-san. 2 Ritviks chanted on the beads just below him and then handed the beads up to him. In other words, he deputed them to chant on the beads on his behalf. It was a very large ceremony, and I came up to him from the end of the line. Not quite the end, but close to the end. Prabhupada then handed me my beads and gave me my spiritual name. However, I learned later that my spiritual name had been selected by his personal secretary, who at that time was Pradyumna, and Prabhupada accepted what Pradyumna determined to be my new spiritual name. A little bit later that day, a Ritvik performed the actual fire sacrifice for all of the devotees. At my Brahminical initiation in mid-1974, in the summer of 74 in Evanston, Prabhupada draped the Brahmin thread around my neck, head, and shoulder, and he showed me how to count the interior indexes of the fingers on my right hand. The Gayatri mantra that is chanted by Brahmins in his branch, which is special, it's a special Gayatri, was given to me either a bit before this, when I was alone with him in the private room, or immediately afterward. You can say that there were different processes back in the day connoting different ways and means for the process of initiation to be conducted. There was what could be called direct initiation, wherein Prabhupada conducted everything personally himself. This was almost entirely in the 60s. In fact, in the 60s, that's how it went for everybody. Then there were different varieties of initiation, one of which could be called Ritvik initiation, with Prabhupada active and physically present. For both of mine, that was the case. And then there was the Ritvik initiation, where Prabhupada was not physically present. This initiation became the main process for the majority of devotees by the mid-70s, as could only have been expected. The movement was growing big. Nevertheless, all these ceremonies and processes were all equal. Whatever label you choose to use, they all were genuine initiation processes offered by a bona fide spiritual master, one who was personally manifest in physical form somewhere in the world, even if not directly present at the ceremony or transmitting the Gayatri Mantra. I have deliberated this principle that I'm speaking on now by first delineating all those previous yoga labels and the prologue. Now, our presentation this month is in continuation of analyzing the book entitled 11 Naked Emperors, and henceforward we'll use the acronym ENE, a book authored by Henry Doktorski. We are now at chapter 4. The book covers everything connected to the zonal Acharya takeover of Prabhupada's branch of the Hare Krishna movement in the late 70s and much of the 80s. We have thus far analyzed its first 3 chapters. We now proceed to chapter 4, entitled Ritvik Priests. And we have to make a side note here. How Doktorski spells this word is not the technical Vedic spelling, but I am not at all criticizing him for that. The spelling Ritvik, R-I-T-V-I-C, is what is employed in his book, but even that is not technically accurate. The actual Sanskrit spelling is R with a dot below it, T-V-I-C, for Ritvik. Arose by any other name. Those who fault find based upon the spelling of this term are superficial beings only posing as transcendentalists. They're prone to find any little thing that they can concoct in order to cast aspersions, especially against those who expose their institution. It is nonsense to get hung up about how this word is spelled. As many of you know, I spell the word differently from all of these other spellings. I apply phonetics in my spelling. R-I-T-T-V-I-K, Ritvik. You will thus pronounce the word how it should be pronounced when you read it in any of my articles. By the way, it was spelled like this by many, if not most, devotees back in the day, especially once Ritvik initiation became prominent, which was the case no later than 1971. As such, throughout this month's review of Chapter 4, I shall present the spelling of R with a dot below it, T-V-I-C, or R-I-T-V-I-C, or R-I-T-V-I-K. I shall present it as R-I-T-T-V-I-K, Ritvik. This means that whenever ENE refers to the word, which obviously you can tell by the chapter's title will be very often, I am modifying what is in the book's text in my own text that I'm giving to you. This should be considered inconsequential, especially since I've explained why I spell the word the way I do and have also specifically explained what my spelling is and why I use it that way. In the summer of 1977, the Ritvik system was reestablished. Here was a quote from the letter reestablishing it, an excerpt. Quote, "After considering the recommendation, these representatives may accept the devotee as an initiated disciple of Srila Prabhupada by giving a spiritual name, or in the case of second initiation, by chanting on the Gayatri thread, just as Srila Prabhupada has done. The newly initiated devotees are disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the above 11 senior devotees acting as His representative," unquote. As I just mentioned, this excerpt is contained in the letter which reestablished the Ritvik system of initiation in the second week of July 1977. This letter is quite important, but it was not dictated by Prabhupada on the dictaphone. That becomes immediately obvious when you read it. It was created by the notorious TKG, who was the evil gatekeeper of Prabhupada for almost all of that final fateful year. Prabhupada simply signed his name on a line near the left bottom of the letter, listed as, quote-unquote, authorized. In and of itself, the letter is not flawed. 11 senior men are named to again provide Ritvik initiations to newcomers coming to Prabhupada's movement. For months, there had been no initiations, and now initiations were resuming. And the only change was of no major consequence. The nearest Ritvik would approve the recommendation that a newcomer be initiated, which meant that Prabhupada would not be consulted. Despite being recommended by his temple president, I am aware of at least one devotee who Prabhupada refused to initiate prior to 1977. Prabhupada approved almost of all the recommendations sent to him by temple presidents and sannyasis. Everyone knows this. He depended upon the discrimination of his temple presidents. In his final year with us, it was still the same system, with one intermediate step vacated. No big deal. In ENE, the following example of one of the very first Ritvik initiations is given, and there certainly is something to glean from it. Quote, "From Georgetown, Guyana, we wrote Srila Prabhupada asking him to give Vaikuntanath Brahmin initiation so he could worship deities as I had been given Gayatri initiation previous to marriage. In his return letter, Srila Prabhupada said that any Brahmin could perform the ceremony and give Vaikuntanath Gayatri. He said Saradya, or any Brahmin, could do it. So I performed the sacred fire sacrifice before a few dozen guests." So this is someone who's talking on behalf of Saradya, who was Vaikuntanath's wife. So actually, one of the very first Ritvik initiations, quite possibly the first one, was performed by a female. It was always well known by all devotees in the movement that Ritvik initiation made the new disciple an initiate of Prabhupada, not an initiated disciple of the Ritvik performing the ceremony. In point of fact, that duty of the Ritvik was nothing more than a temporary seva. The newly initiated devotee owed the Ritvik no allegiance, nor did the newly initiated devotee have to be concerned about any of the technicalities of the ceremony. Once the Ritvik process was reestablished in 1977, that the new initiate was Prabhupada's disciple was made clear. Quote, "The newly initiated devotees are disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the above 11 senior devotees acting as his representative, unquote. ENE presents a quote from Prabhupada verifying this well-known fact. Quote, Prabhupada reminded him that the disciples he initiates are not his disciples. They're Prabhupada's disciples. Quote, they shall, of course, still be considered as my disciples, not that they shall become your disciples. But you will be empowered by me to chant the beads, and that is the same effect of binding master and disciple as if I were personally chanting, unquote. As chapter 4 unfolds in ENE, Doktorski's book, it lists how during a 2-day period, and one after another, various senior men were selected and authorized to be Ritviks. It was once again an example of outstanding research by Doktorski, but there's no need to repeat any of those historical details. Of course, at the very beginning, we were given the example of a female devotee, Srila, who had received Brahminical initiation, authorized to act as a Ritvik in order to have her husband share the deity duties which require a Brahmin. Always keep the Ritvik in perspective, and that particular example should certainly help you to do so. In the 70s, Prabhupada wanted the Ritviks to expand in number, although not every Tom, Dick, and Bhakta Ari would qualify for the post, obviously. ENE points this out as follows. Quote, in 1974, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada indicated that any GBC member or sannyasi could chant on a new candidate's beads and initiate disciples on his behalf, unquote. The beads may be chanted upon by a sannyasi or GBC man, quote, unquote. Your host speaker has thus set the historical background here, and now it's time to confront the chief issue. And that chief issue is raised in chapter 4 of ENE. As could only be expected, that issue was the product of the Machiavellian manipulator TKG. After all, he wrote that Ritvik letter, merely signed by Prabhupada on the line authorized, which was then snail-mailed to all temple presidents. It was a list of 11 names. But did it imply more than what was clearly stated within it? TKG claimed that it did, quote, Srila Prabhupada said he would appoint several devotees who shall perform initiation in the future, even after his disappearance. The disciples they accept shall be their disciples, and Srila Prabhupada would be their grand spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada clearly appointed 11 successors for giving initiation. Everything is clearly documented, either by tape recordings or signed letters, so there's no room for any doubt whatsoever. Anyone who expresses doubt or disbelief is in ignorance of the facts. This was stated, this was wrote by TKG in one of his books, unquote. Successors? No room for doubt? Horse crap! It can be argued that, at least technically, this is the initial source of the nescience that led to the smash and grab takeover by the 11 pretender zonals in the spring of 1978. When TKG falsely claims that everything is clearly documented, he is making a drastically false claim. There's no documentation whatsoever that establishes this transference appointment of power from Ritvik to Diksha Guru to successor. It is a malefic myth. But almost everyone in the movement in the late 70s and early 80s believed it. It had the power of the big lie. Tattvamasi. Everyone accepted it. No one could even think that the, air quotes, ISKCON leaders were lying when they alleged that they had been appointed by Prabhupada to be gurus in both May of 1977 at Ramanreti, that one in theory, and according to transitive acknowledgement in July of 1977 via the aforementioned Ritvik letter created by TKG. The idea that the appointment of 11 Ritviks was the covert appointment of 11 Diksha Gurus is a devastating false presupposition. As such, the initiations that these so-called Ritviks prosecuted later, because they were no longer Ritviks after Prabhupada departed physical manifestation, these so-called initiations were completely unauthorized. On the other hand, it is a major misconception, indeed a heresy, to advocate the counter presupposition that they remained Ritviks and were to conduct Ritviks initiations after Prabhupada disappeared. This dichotomy has created a binary of two major deviations via the dreadful Sahajya cults of so-called ISKCON and Ritvik. Each is based upon a different and conflicting presupposition to what the appointment of 11 senior men to the position of ritual conductors was and entailed during the 4+ months that Prabhupada remained manifest on the physical plane in 1977. E&E expresses doubt that the 11 Ritviks were meant to automatically become Diksha Gurus by their Ritvik appointments in July of 1977. Quote, did Prabhupada intend, as Tamal Krishna claimed, that the 11 should be automatically promoted to the position of full-fledged Diksha Gurus after his passing? Perhaps not. It is more likely that Prabhupada merely gave the 11 the first opportunity to prove that they could function as Diksha Gurus. As a group, he never gave them a direct or official order to function in that capacity, unquote. There are two considerations here. The transitive claim is most doubtful, and no one received an official order to be Diksha Guru. E&E goes on to mention claims allegedly made by some devotees that Prabhupada authorized them privately. Oh, then why didn't these so-called gurus speak up when the deviation was rolled out and implemented? They had a duty to do so if they were gurus, but they remained silent. They were not gurus if they received this so-called private authorization, because a genuine guru would not shrink from explicitly and boldly defending his spiritual master's movement by railing against all that went down in the spring of 1978. On the other hand, if they were gurus, which should be clear now is not the view of your host speaker, then each and every one of those cowards fell down immediately in 1978 for the anartha of dereliction of duty. E&E then segues into a diversion about missing tapes and some personal servants having underheard, allegedly, that Prabhupada created a brand new system of Ritvik to be implemented after his physical departure. The missing tapes were supposed to have verified this system, which Prabhupada would never have created. No guru can create such an unprecedented system wherein he remains the only initiating spiritual master for many years, or many decades, or many centuries, or for the remainder of the Golden Age, or for the remainder of the Kali Yuga. It is a defect in this chapter that any of this diversion was even explored at all, and that's a flaw in it, but not too serious. E&E then provides 2 examples of where TKG keeps other senior men from approaching Prabhupada to seek clarification as to what was to be done, especially in relation to initiations after he gave up his manifest body. These examples are valuable. You can read the book if you want to know the specifics connected to these anecdotes, and I urge you to do so. TKG was the agent of Kali in virtually everything he did and did not permit in those final months. One of his close buddies informed him that there would likely be really big problems up the road if the clarification he wanted, that devotee wanted, was not attained, which TKG prevented it from being attained. Oh yeah, that can be called the understatement of the century. Next, E&E delves into a raw nerve topic. After Prabhupada departed, how to determine whether or not a devotee was to become an initiating spiritual master at Diksha Guru. This part of the chapter contains 2 opposing views, and also it's a product of painstaking, meticulous research. Quote, Vaishnavas believe that the personal order from the spiritual master to initiate disciples can also come after the spiritual master has departed, as in a dream. For instance, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada accepted the sannyas order on September 17, 1959, because of the urging of his godbrothers and recurring dreams of his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, appearing to him and ordering him to take this important step. Other advanced Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis have also received orders during dreams to initiate disciples. When the king of Orissa, Mukunda Deva, who reigned as monarch from 1559 to 1568, requested Vaishnava initiation from Ganga Mata Thakurani, the saintly princess daughter of Naresha Narayan, the Raj of Puntia, she at first refused. But when Lord Jagannath, the principal deity at his temple of Jagannath at Puri, appeared to her in a dream and ordered her to initiate the king, she relented. Unquote. This excerpt verifies what you should be able to immediately glean from it. Prabhupada can contact any of his disciples whenever he wants, at any time he wants. He's a Mukta Jiva. He's like Narada Muni. Indeed, he has those same powers as Narada Muni. If he wants to come to you in a dream, that dream is no longer astral, it's spiritual. Can he today give you an order? Certainly he can. Those who dispute this do not believe it, and as such, they're faithless. And how can a faithless person be a guru? Such a materialistic devotee thus ignores what Prabhupada clearly enjoined in that all-important May 1977 room conversation with his governing commissioners. Quote, when I order you become guru, he becomes regular guru, that's all, unquote. When I order you. The purport is self-evident, and E&E presents examples. There are many more than those, but what was presented in this chapter suffices to make the point. You have to get his order. To be an initiating spiritual master in Prabhupada's branch of the Hare Krishna movement in his disciplic succession of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you have to get his order. It is not optional. Now, of course, the institutional gurus of so-called ISKCON reject this. They say that you can become guru after you wait in queue for 1 or 2 or 3 years and then receive GBC imprimatur to be guru, institutional guru in their cult. Institutional guru means bogus guru. E gives an example of this deviant mentality. Quote, still others claim that Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada does not have to give a personal order in the flesh or in a dream for a disciple to begin initiation. He had in his books already given blanket orders to all of his disciples to become initiating spiritual masters. One of these others explained, quote, he has already given us the order. To the degree that we follow strictly and can explain the science of Krishna, to that degree we're guru. It's not that we need some separate appointment. The appointment is in every one of his books, unquote. Oh, well, that's nice. That's in every one of his books. However, it does not actually work that way, does it? First, a devotee who is a party man in so-called ISKCON cannot on his own make the determination and immediately begin initiating newcomers, although he considers that he's strictly following and does not therefore need to receive Prabhupada's direct order in order to be a Diksha Guru. And two, secondly, even if some party man concludes that he's strictly following, and that would only be superficially because none of them actually are, if he concludes that he's strictly following in the, air quotes, ISKCON Confederation, he still needs outside help. He needs to be recommended by a senior man to some kind of guru selection committee, one which is assigned to consider guru eligibility in the massive and complex bureaucracy of that dangerous cult. As such, when someone buys into the rationalization just quoted above in E&E, or another fool, another deviant buys into the cult stricture of waiting in queue after first getting some kind of recommendation, all of that is not in accordance with Prabhupada's order. Prabhupada's order is crystal clear. If some genuine devotee receives the order to become Diksha Guru directly from Prabhupada, that fortunate devotee would immediately become unfortunate if he then kowtowed to the, air quotes, ISKCON institution and waited for a year or years in order to begin initiating disciples who approached him. If he did that, he would immediately fall down by making such a compromise. He got the order. Of course, none of those institutional gurus will ever get the order, either before or after. E&E then segues to the final days of Prabhupada's disappearance. Obviously, a whole book on this topic would be required in order to cover the event comprehensively, and E&E makes no such attempt. That is understandable and it's wanted. It does, however, delve into an exchange in the very last days between Prabhupada and one of his few, very few favorable godbrothers. This one was named B.V. Puri Maharaj. B.V. Puri Maharaj was under the false impression that Prabhupada appointed 11 initiating spiritual masters, and Prabhupada attempted to disabuse him of that notion. Quote, this is a remembrance by B.V. Puri Maharaj. Quote, after your demise, the institution will be nowhere. At least you must put them in line. They should have some tradition. In India, there is some tradition, but in Western countries, no tradition. Then he, referring to Prabhupada, said, what to do? Everything is Krishna's will. Unquote. And he passed away. Previous to that occasion, I asked, Maharaj, you've established 11 gurus. There's no harmony. There can be no harmony. Guru must be one. You've selected 11 gurus. He said, I have not selected. I have appointed 11 Ritviks, unquote. Still, that self-serving and false presupposition that Prabhupada had appointed 11 Diksha Gurus was believed, promulgated, implemented, and enforced from July 1977 onward. It was particularly stressed, obviously, after Prabhupada left the scene. Even though B.V. Puri Maharaj was told directly by Prabhupada that he, Prabhupada, did not appoint gurus, that godbrother still said that Prabhupada had appointed Diksha Gurus. So it was with everybody, this misconception, because the big lie was spread and contaminated everyone, just like a kind of crypto-occult Ebola virus. E&E gives a brief recap of the final day of Prabhupada's actual passing, along with the lamentation felt by his disciples. The 4th chapter of this book then closes in the following way, quote, Yet, even as Prabhupada's followers mourned their loss, some of his leading disciples had already begun to plan how they were going to become initiating spiritual masters themselves. Prabhupada's greatest fear, that after his death there will be chaos in his society, had begun to manifest, unquote. Prabhupada knew well that his movement could and would break into factions via pseudo-spiritual tribalism. That is the case at this time. However, in the immediate aftermath of late 1977 and early 1978, the chaos that ensued was covert and of a very different variety, what one prominent so-called ISKCON leader called the sole Acharya system. Technically, there were 11 princes in their designated principalities called zones, but within each of those enclaves, its wheelhouse revolved around the sole Acharya system of governance and culture. Before this dreadful implementation surfaced, a loose planning stage was required. We shall next month analyze it threadbare. For your edification and realization, Chapter 4 closes by quoting E. Burke Rockford, Jr., unquote. Quote, the scholar of ISKCON and professor of sociology and religion at Middlebury College in Vermont, E. Burke Rochford, Jr., explained, quote, Prabhupada's death was a major turning point for ISKCON's development. Over the next several years, ISKCON faced continuing and often bitter sources of internal conflict. Prabhupada's death left ISKCON with no one legitimate heir or power structure to lead the movement, unquote. Actually, over the next 4+ decades. The internal conflict stemmed from bad leaders, inducing their hatchet men, sycophants, fanatics, space cadets, kick-me's, and blind followers to accept all kinds of deviations that came out of their pie holes. What has been emphasized in this month's presentation is that if you walk back the cat, it all had as its fulcrum the false presupposition that Prabhupada appointed gurus before he departed physical manifestation. Be assured, he never did this. Near the end of that fateful May 1977 room conversation with his GBC men, Prabhupada said that he would appoint some gurus. He didn't. He didn't either in May or in July either. He only appointed Ritviks. Why? The reasons why are interrelated and twofold. One, no one was qualified, so he could not appoint or recognize any of his disciples to the post, either then or for the future. And two, he changed his mind and decided not to appoint gurus. He had every right to do so, and he did so. Furthermore, there is no question that he recognized a successor, nor did he recognize 11 of them, although a parody played out for a while of so-called 11 successors. Grade-wise, I give Chapter 4 of ENE a straight A. The colossal hoax, known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, is a pseudo-spiritual scam. It is all based upon 11 seeds of self-apotheosis sown into the fertile soil of Gaudiya Math in the spring of 1978. This event itself was based upon a major misconception, nothing more than a false presupposition without standing, that when Prabhupada appointed Ritviks in July of 1977, he also appointed them as initiating gurus for the future after he departed. There is no solid evidence of this. The idea that Ritviks automatically become gurus has no Shastric verification. The current Ritvik movement, centrifugally divided into endlessly mutable groups and tribes, is based upon evidence so weak that it can barely even be called evidence. Similarly, the so-called evidence that Prabhupada recognized gurus in July of 1977 in a letter that he did not even dictate, and which focused on ceremonial Ritviks, with Prabhupada remaining the only initiating spiritual master of his organization. That so-called evidence is just as weak, false, and deviant as the Ritvik hypothesis. If you want to keep your spiritual life healthy, or if that isn't even a consideration, if you want to just remain sane, if you want to remain sane amidst all of this massive deviation and chaos, reject the whole kit and caboodle. So-called ISKCON is not Bhakti Yoga, nor Buddha Yoga, nor Seva Yoga. It is imposter yoga. It is a colorful plastic rose. It is nothing more than a show bottle. It is colored water in a bottle, advertised as medicine, but when you take it, it does not work. Sadeva Samya.